Name of Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance and asks, does the investment protocol the Prime Minister will be signing with Australia include any provisions that would stop Australians from buying shares in New Zealand state-owned assets such as Meridian Energy, Mighty River Power, Genesis Energy and Solid Energy should a future government privatise them?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has spelt out 5 clear tests would have to be met for the government to proceed with the mixed ownership model for those 4 SOEs. One of those tests is that New Zealand investors would have to be at the front of the queue and that we would be confident of widespread and substantial ownership by New Zealanders, in addition to the 51% stake that would certainly be owned by the government. The details of the investment protocol will be announced tomorrow, but I can assure the member that the protocol is consistent with that test.
Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How can New Zealanders be at the front of the queue to buy shares in these partially privatised assets when, by its very nature, the investment protocol requires equal treatment of Australian and New Zealand investors?
The Honourable Bill English.
Oh, Mr. Speaker, as I said before, the details of the protocol will be announced tomorrow and the member will have an opportunity to scrutinise it in detail, and that may help lay some of his fears to rest.
Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can he confirm matters which are already in the public domain, which is that under the investment protocol, any investment less than $477 million from an Australian investor in a New Zealand company faces no scrutiny from our Overseas Investment Office?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, the details will be announced tomorrow, but clearly that has been a matter about which the government has been negotiating, and I can assure the member that the tests we've set out for the mixed ownership model are consistent with the protocol.
Aaron Gilmore.
Question. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary question to the Prime Minister. How much do New Zealanders have invested in Australia?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, when we're considering these issues of what Australians can invest here, we do well to remember that New Zealand benefits from a more than proportionate investment in Australia. In fact, recent figures show that New Zealanders have about $36 billion invested in Australia. That is, we have investments in Australia equivalent to about 2/3 of the size of our own stock market. The investment protocol will continue with a process that's been going on for 25 years, which is to move towards a single economic market, and up until recently that was endorsed by all major political parties.
Supplementary question,
the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, has the Treasury warned him that the privatisation or partial privatisation of the state-owned power companies within a decade will result in corner-hold stakes being held by foreign multinational companies in those power companies?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, no, because that's not true.
Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, is it? The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
I seek leave of the House to table a Treasury document that says precisely what I asked in the question, and the Minister of Finance denied that being the case. The document is a Treasury document, Crown ownership of commercial entities, I think given to the Cabinet around December last year.
Leave us sought to table that document. Is there any objection? There is no objection. Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister of Finance agree that it is one of the fundamental principles of these investment treaties that investors from different countries get equal treatment? And hence, how will he be able to discriminate against Australian investors after signing up to a treaty that actually guarantees them equal treatment?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, when the member has the opportunity to scrutinise the protocol in detail, then he'll be able to draw his own conclusions. But as a general point, it is not at all unusual for someone who is selling assets to be able to discriminate among classes of buyers.
Dr. Russell Norman.
Does he agree that New Zealand's current account deficit is in large part made up of the investment income deficit due to profits sent overseas by New Zealand companies that are owned by overseas owners, and that if we partially privatise these state-owned assets, they go into Australian or other ownership, it will simply add to the amount of money going offshore and make our current account deficit worse?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, we need to remember the flows work both ways. As I said before, New Zealanders have $36 billion invested in Australia, and we believe that the Australian government's open policy of accepting New Zealand investment is beneficial to many New Zealand savers who are able to get the benefits of investing in a large economy, which at the moment has been performing pretty well. So this is a matter of mutual policy positions where we're open to investment from Australia and they're open to investment from us. And some Australian investment has been here a long time. I think AMP and the ANZ have been here for almost 150 years.
Dr Russell Norman.
To the Minister of Finance, does he agree that the transfer of profits involving the Australian banks has been a very significant drain on the New Zealand economy, possibly in the order of $2.5 billion a year, and that if we have further foreign ownership of the New Zealand economy, it will make that problem worse?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, the member is generally correct, and of course the answer to that is the answer New Zealanders are now coming up with, which is to save more so that there's a bigger pool of capital in New Zealand for us to do things like buy back the banks or buy into any other asset New Zealanders feel that they can control. Fortunately, at the moment, New Zealanders are able, because of Australia's open investment policy, to buy shares in exactly those banks. So if they think they are excessively profitable, they can benefit from it by buying shares in it.
Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So for the purpose of clarity, will the Minister guarantee that the investment protocol between New Zealand and Australia will guarantee New Zealand investors preferential treatment in any partial privatisation of New Zealand state-owned assets?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, as I've said to the member a number of times, when he has the opportunity to scrutinise the protocol, he can make up his own mind about it. What I can say to the member is that the protocol is consistent with the test the government has set, which is that we would like to see substantial and widespread New Zealand ownership under the mixed ownership model.
Question number 2, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.